The story begins with a high wide shot of the tree line of a lush green rainforest. Intercut is a sequence of images of Jake Sully, Sam Worthington, a paralyzed war veteran and ex-Marine. He wakes up in a giant spaceship en route to Pandora, a forest-covered Earth-like moon orbiting Polyphemus, a giant blue Jupiter-like planet. She was one of a large number of passengers, all waking up after nearly 6 years of crying on the way to Pandora. Emerging from his zero-gravity sleep pod, he is tended to by the ship's staff. He opens his locker, which is marked Sullet. Jake tells us that he has a deceased twin brother, Tom, a scientist who will be part of a high-level program overseen by corporate and military strategists to study the environment and the inhabitants of Pandora. Because Jake and his brother are an exact genetic match, he is given a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take over his brother's contract with a corporate military entity and travel several light years away to the once-glimpsed world outpost of Pandora. Realizing the notion of being free and having a fresh start, Jake agrees to the deal as his brother's body is cremated. Now transported from a spaceship to Pandora via the shuttle, Jake is one of many soldiers and civilians to land on Pandora, about 4.3 light years from Earth. We see scenes of the base and its construction and the huge mining machines digging up the Earth in the vast quarry as Jake ponders his new role. All passengers are instructed to wear full-face breathing masks because the planet's atmosphere will not support human life. 20 seconds of exposure to the planet's poisonous atmosphere causes unconsciousness, with death occurring about 4 minutes later. As the other passengers disembarked and took their first steps on the base, nicknamed Hell's Gate, surrounded by a large perimeter fence, Jake followed in his wheelchair, earning the nickname Meals on Wheels from some arrogant Marines. He admits via voiceover that he lost the use of his leg during one of his tours of duty on Earth, and while the spinal injury seems reparable, it requires money, which is hard to come by. Achieved in today's economy. Jake immediately goes to a military briefing where Colonel Miles Quaritch, Stephen Lang, is talking to the assembled troops and some civilians who have come. He reminds them that they're not in Kansas anymore and tells them about Pandora's native inhabitants, the Na'vi. Quaritch, who has a large set of scars on the side of his head, says that they are hard to kill and almost anything out there will try to kill you. And, although it's his job to keep his people alive, he says he won't succeed in this task, not with you guys. If they want to survive, go ahead, they have to follow Pandora's rules. Jake goes to the science lab where he meets biologist Norm Spellman, Joel David Moore, and Dr. Max Patel, Dilip Rao, 2 members of the Avatar program. When Jake first sees his own avatar, we learn about the program itself. Humans cannot breathe Pandora's air, but the Avatar program allows humans to bond with their own avatars, human Na'vi hybrids. Genetically bred. And they function as if they were native Na'vi. In his avatar body, Jake will be able to walk again and breathe the atmosphere. Avatars closely resemble their human drivers. When Norm tells Jake that his avatar looks like him, Jake says deep down that he looks like his dead brother. Jake and Norm enter the science department just in time for Dr. Grace Augustine, Sigourney Weaver, the show's chief scientist, to wake up in a specially designed pod that connects her to her avatar and opens the top. Norm tells Jake that he heard that he likes plants more than people. She rose from her pod and spoke Na'vi to Norm. Satisfied with Norm's command of the language, she turned to Jake. He tells her that he needs his brother Tom, a PhD who trained 3 years for the Pandora mission, but that he doesn't need Jake because Jake has no lab experience and has never been associated with an avatar. Jake tries to hint that he's a fast learner, but grumpy Grace isn't impressed. Grace breaks into the base control room to confront Parker Selfridge, Giovanni Ribisi, the base commander and representative of the Resource Development Administration, RDA, a corporation that oversees all military and other personnel. Guy in the colony. She tells Jake that she will serve as a security escort on his team while they are on the planet's surface. Grace tells Parker that she needs an investigator, not a jughead dropout. She doubted that Jake would be useful to his botanical research. Parker responded, saying that he disagreed, saying that they got lucky with Jake. Since he was the perfect genetic match for the Avatar intended for his twin brother, they could use their military skills on the Avatar's body towards the overall goal of the operation, extracting the ore unobtainium, a powerful energy source that sold for millions of dollars. Kilos. And could bring cheap energy returns to a dying Earth. Parker tells Grace that one way to help achieve this goal is to win the hearts and minds of the natives, to get their cooperation. Grace argued that many of the Na'vi had been killed by the military under the auspices of Operation Selfridge. Back at the lab the next day, Jake and Norm bond with their avatars for the first time. Jake, in his avatar, wakes up in a different room than the other avatars and the staff. Within seconds, Jake unnerved his guide when, delighted with his ability to move his legs again, he moved too fast and attempted to walk, the first time he had been able to since he had been paralyzed. Human lab workers can't help it. The Na'vi stand over 10 feet tall, sometimes closer to 12 feet, and are much stronger than humans. When his long tail hit the instrument, a staff member told him to stop and lie down again. Jake ignored her and walked out of the room into the daylight. He found himself in a recreation area where other avatars played sports and staff, in their protective gear, performed various tasks. Jake meets an avatar of Grace, who is kinder than the human Grace, and accompanies Jake to the barracks where he is finally encouraged to rest. Before going to bed, Jake examined the rows of sinews on him, long appendages that looked like braids of hair. At the end of the line are a bunch of hidden tendrils. When the avatar sleeps, the link is broken and Jake himself wakes up. Later, Jake meets Trudy Chacon, Michelle Rodriguez, a retired Navy pilot with whom he will spend a few weeks getting used to her avatar and exploring Pandora. Jake will act as the gate gunner on his team. Jake meets Cole Quaritch, who is lifting weights. The colonel told Jake that he looked up his service record and was impressed by what he accomplished on his various tours, including one in Venezuela. The colonel warns Jake of the dangers that await him on Pandora. He also expressed his belief that the Avatar program was a joke but offered an opportunity for a unique reconnaissance mission if Jake could find out and tell the colonel what he wanted to know about the natives, how to persuade them to stay away from the depot of unobtainium ore and how to hit hard if they don't. The colonel will make sure Jake gets the surgery he needs to regain the use of his legs. The colonel dons the AMP suit, the bipedal exoskeleton used for the mission on Pandora, and walks away. Reconnected to his avatar, Jake flies over Pandora's surface in Trudy's battleship, along with Grace, Norm, and others. The team lands in the woods, where Grace and Norm begin taking flora samples and taking measurements. Jake is distracted by his surroundings and wanders into a field of helicaradian flowers, which are quite tall and shrink when Jake touches them. Trouble arises when the monsters there, hammer-headed creatures with thick armor, confront Jake. Grace orders him to hold his ground and not shoot, otherwise the animal will get angry and attack. His armor was too thick for the weapons to have any effect. Jake managed to survive, but only because another beast, a panther-like Thanator, came up behind him, causing the Titanotheres to back up and surround his cub. The Thanator then turned to Jake. Grace tells him to run, and a Thanator chases him in a chase that separates Jake from his crew. He lost his weapon and was knocked down by the animal, but freed himself by dropping his backpack. Eventually, the chase leads to a waterfall, where Jake jumps to safety, leaving the Thanator roaring above him. Jake's team searches for him, but Trudy says they have to get back to base because night operations are not allowed. Grace says she won't stay the night. It is now night and we see Jake sharpening a long stick into a spear. Jake is being watched from above, this time by a Na'vi. The Na'vi aimed an arrow at Jake and were about to shoot, but decided against it when a small, glowing, ethereal creature landed on his bow. We later learn that they are very pure spirits, also known as the Seed of Iwa, the almighty god of the novice. The archers retire. Jake is stalked by a pack of viper wolves. He dipped the tip of his spear into the peach-like flammable liquid. He lit the end and used it as a torch against the viper wolf, which circled him, teeth bared and jaws clenched. Animals attacked Jake. He fought back, killing several people and being shot down by others. The archers watching Jake join the battle at his side. He kills several viper wolves and makes the others run away. He gently puts several wailing injured animals out of their misery and prayed for them. Jake tries to thank him for helping him fight off the attackers. He received her thanks from her with her disdain, telling her that it was all her fault, that they didn't have to die, and that she should go back to where she came from. Jake asks her if she feels that way. Why is she helping him? "You have a strong heart. Don't be afraid," she explained. "But stupid." Jake tries to follow her rescuer up a tree, asking for her help and saying that he wants to learn. He refused, saying she's coming back, which Celestials can't be taught. Just then, Iowa's seed reappears and begins to land on a nervous Jake. He asks what it is. "A very pure spirit," he replied, and Jake was protected by them, affecting his mate. When the seed walks away from her, she relents, telling him to come with her. As Jake tries to keep up with his savior, Neytiri, Zoe Saldana, he is knocked down by a bolo thrown by a patrol of Omatakean warriors. Their leader is Tsute, Laz Alonso, next in line to the throne, and the man Neytiri is expected to marry. Neytiri stops them from hurting Jake by telling them that there is a sign from Iowa. Tsute tells his men to take him to Tashik, father, approximate spelling, and Iowa, mother. Jake is introduced to Neytiri's parents, Itukin, Westudi, and Emoat, CCH Pounder, who are respectively the king and queen of the tribe. Jake tells the old man that he is a warrior, a driver, and he intends to learn from them. Emoat pierced Jake's chest and tasted his blood, deciding that it was Iowa's will that he stay with Omatakea and Neytiri, however reluctantly, to be his teachers in their ways and customs. After the ritual meeting, Jake is taken to his bed, a leaf on the mother tree that surrounds him like a cocoon. As he falls asleep, human Jake comes back to life. During breakfast, all the scientists, including Grace, focus on everything Jake says. Norm looked very upset and sullen. She was Grace's original choice to bond with Omatakea. Even military and corporate representatives have loved Jake. Home Tree sits on a large deposit of unobtainium, so Jake seems to be his best chance to convince Omatakea to move, or advise the colonel on how to force them. They told him he had 3 months to reach his goal before the bulldozers arrived. The next few scenes revolve around Jake's avatar training with Neytiri and the human Jake reporting on his experiences via a video log that he educates after each day's activities. He is attached to his pony, an important animal to the Navy. Jake must learn to ride the animal and connect its neural tail to its antennae. The human Jake continues to report on the home tree infrastructure and other Navy details. Jake has difficulty learning to control his ponies and is often referred to as Song, Scound, by Neytiri and Tsute, which he tells us means bastard. Jake tells the colonel and Selfridge about Omatakea's home, the giant home tree. Below is a large unobtainium deposit. Jake tells them about the 1,000-foot-tall tree structure. Quaritch sees an opportunity to destroy the tree, but Jake asks that he be allowed to negotiate with the Navy and convince them to leave. Sensing that Jake is being manipulated by Quaritch, Selfridge, and the rest of the military in the mining operation, Grace decides to take the operation out of Dodge. He moved them to the Hallelujah Mountains, a remote area with a large floating island sacred to the Navy and also rich in unobtainium. Grace wanted her territory away from GDR officers and military men at the base. In the next video log, Jake talks about his language lessons, saying that his time with the Navy was like unlocking a weapon. Enough repetition and you can't help but learn it. This is interspersed with scenes of his ongoing training with Neytiri, who teaches him about the Navy-Forest relationship. He tells Jake that all energy is borrowed and one day we will have to pay it back. Jake seems to understand this, and as he says a prayer for the animal he's hunted and just killed, Neytiri says he's ready for an important ceremony, tying up and riding Declan, the flying mountain banshee. To get to the Banshee lair, Jake must accompany Neytiri, Sute and 2 other Navi apprentices to the highest point of the Hallelujah Mountains. Several factors, the altitude, the ferocity of wild banshees, make this a dangerous lesson, but Jake's bravery and his successful bond with the banshees earn him the respect of the Navi warriors present, even from the Sute. He makes a link to the tendrils on its tail, and as he mounts the flying animal, he comments that he is not a rider, but he was born to do this. Jake, Neytiri and the others ride together towards the Tree of Souls, the holiest place for the Navi. While flying on a hunting trip, Jake and Neytiri are suddenly chased and attacked by a creature known to the Navi as a Torek, a giant, brightly colored flying mountain banshee intent on killing everything that flies. Neytiri says her name means last shadow. A Torek shadow, once seen, is usually the last shadow ever seen, as its attacks are almost always fatal. When Jake returns to his human form, it's clear that this latest experience has changed him, as he says, "Out there is the real world, here's a dream." The Colonel approaches him to tell him that his mission has been accomplished and that he will return to Earth that day. And true to his word, the Colonel has arranged for Jake to receive the treatment he needs to regain the use of his legs. Jake wants to delay leaving him because he says he's right at the point where he'll be initiated into the tribe and accepted as one of them, and then have the status to negotiate with the Navi to move. The Colonel agreed. Jake attends a Navi ceremony, where he learns that the Navi believe that everyone can be born twice. Neytiri takes Jake to a place of prayer, the voice tree, where they use their lines to join the tree. Neytiri tells Jake that he can make a bow out of a tree, and that he can choose a woman. Jake tells Neytiri that he has chosen her and she says yes. They sleep together under a tree and Jake wakes up in the lab. In the morning, Neytiri woke up to a fallen tree, then the presence of a bulldozer. The soldiers were advancing when the forest fell around Neytiri, who dragged Jake to safety. At his remote location, Jake prepares to connect with his avatar, and when he finally comes back to life, Jake gets on one of the bulldozers and tries to stop him, ending up destroying his camera system and firing several shots. Other Navi warriors arrive, while the Colonel, reviewing the film at the base, recognizes Jake in his avatar form as the one he tried to stop his mission from. The bulldozers continued their operation, bulldozing the hallowed ground. In Home Tree, the Navi want war. Grace and Jake demurred. There was a heated debate. Sute attempts to kill Jake, jealous to learn that Jake and Neytiri are bonded for life when he and Neytiri are engaged. Jake declares that he is a Navi and has the right to speak. Suddenly, both Grace's and Jake's avatars are knocked unconscious when the connection between them and his human form is suddenly severed by the enraged Colonel, who arrests Jake for trying to stop the bulldozer. Grace and Jake take on the GDR and the military high command. Grace reveals that the Pandora tree forms a network that has more neural connections than exist in the human brain and that the Navi can access that network. As a result, Omaticaya will never leave Home Tree. Parker and the Colonel discuss options. She will launch an attack on Home Tree and on us with gas bombs to drive out the Navi. Jake insists that he be allowed to return to Omaticaya to try to talk them out of leaving, and is given an hour to accomplish that goal. Jake and Grace are not welcome back. Neytiri pushed Jake away. Both Jake and Grace are tied up and left behind by the Omaticaya, who is preparing to fight the humans, who have arrived in a large fleet of airships. Armada launches gas canisters at and around Home Tree. As the battle intensified, most of the weaponry was targeted at the Home Tree root structure, which was brought down by a series of explosions and heavy artillery. Many Omaticayas were killed. Emoat frees Jake and Grace and asks them to save the tribe. Jake arrives and is rejected again by Neytiri when he tries to comfort her. Neytiri's father, Itukin, was killed by a large fragment. His dying wish was for Neytiri to take his sacred path and assume leadership of his people. The destruction seems endless, and suddenly Jake and Grace are returned to their human bodies and are immediately arrested for treason. Norm is also arrested for trying to stop the soldiers from disabling his avatar form. The Na'vi gather at the Tree of Souls. Trudy arrives at the cell with Jake, Grace, and Norm. She tricks her guards into saying that she wants nothing to do with them, only to knock out the guards moments later. As they prepare to escape the base, the colonel shoots and wounds Grace. The team takes Trudy's ship to a remote lab in the floating mountains and takes the pod to another location in the jungle. Jake returned to his avatar body. A hopeful reunion with Omaticaya was never going to happen at first. Jake is an outcast, an alien. Therefore, he made a bold decision. He realized that to win back the trust of the Na'vi, he had to take a high decision. He called his Banshee and went to find the Torek. The strategy is simple but can easily result in death. Jake believed that the Torek never looked for an attack beyond himself and therefore could be approached that way. Jake jumped out of the Banshee and climbed onto the Torek's back. We then see him arrive on a Torek to the Soul Tree in the middle of the Omaticaya ceremony. Jake has successfully joined the Torek. Omaticaya was stunned to see their greatest legend come true. Jake dismounted and pushed his way through the crowd of Na'vi, who, stunned, parted before him. When he arrived at Neytiri, each extended a hand to the other and he said, "I found you." Sute, who is now the head of the tribe, recognizes Jake's new role as Torek Mado. He gave Jake a lot of respect. Jake convinces Moat to help Grace, who is dying. Moat began the preparations, which involved placing the human corpse and Grace's avatar on the Tree of Souls. The idea is to permanently transfer Grace's consciousness to her avatar. Moat tells that Grace must go through Iwa's eyes, and that the Great Mother may choose to let her enter her avatar, or she may choose to let Grace stay with her. The ritual was unsuccessful, though before she died, Grace told Jake that she had seen Iwa. Jake, heartbroken and angry, speaks as Torek Mado and says that it is time to send a message to the Sky Dwellers that this is their land, the land of the Na'vi. But to do so, they must first go to each of the Na'vi clans to ask them to come and fight as one. Sute will be the new leader of the Omaticayan clan and will also help gather other clans to fight with them. The human army had taken the Na'vi infusion in the area, from a few hundred to 2,000 in a day. At this rate, the colonel said as he spoke to his troops, the Na'vi would soon number 20,000, at which point their perimeter would be overrun. Rather than let that happen, he continued, they should launch a preemptive strike while they can. The plan was to convert the space shuttle into a large bomb carrier. Their target was the Tree of Souls, and the attack was planned for 6 o'clock the next day. They believe that if they destroy the Tree of Souls, the Na'vi will leave and never approach this place again. Jake is busy collecting Omaticaya. At the Tree of Souls, he uses his tail to bind the tree and asks Iwa to find Grace's memory, emphasizing that humans killed his mother, Earth, the entity that protects the balance of life. Neytiri appears and tells Jake that Iwa is not taking sides. Quaritch concentrated his fleet, primarily as cover for the Valkyrie shuttles. Bombers and fleets advanced towards the Tree of Souls. A united force of Na'vi began to arrive from heaven and earth. Jake and his Torek, Sute, and the other warriors engage in combat with military aircraft, especially the Scorpion attack ship. Casualties mounted on both sides. Battleships have unparalleled firepower, but they are no match for Declan, who grab and destroy each other. Jake, riding a Torek, is chased and shot by Colonel Quaritch's Dragonfly. Trudy arrives and opens fire on the Colonel's command ship. Banshee Neytiri is beaten and killed. Norm's avatar is badly injured and reverts to his human form. Sute confronted the bombers and was killed in the attempt. Trudy is killed when her ship is destroyed by a hail of fire from Dragonfly Quaritch. Neytiri watched this action from below. Jake tries to communicate with Sute and is unsuccessful, as does his attempt to communicate with Trudy. Meanwhile, the bomber approaches the Soul Tree. Jake tells Neytiri via comlink to back out of the fight. Suddenly, through the remnants of the surrounding forest, a battalion of Titanotheres, Pandora's thickly armored dinosaur-like animals, arrive and attack the forces from Earth. They quickly defeat infantry and soldiers in amped suits. Glad that Iowa had heard Jake's pleas for help, Neytiri rejoined the fight with many other Pandora species behind her. When Vanator appeared nearby, he bowed to him. Jake and his torque took to the skies to meet the barrage as the army ground forces retreated in disarray. Approaching from above, Jake sprays a bomb. It crashed in flames and explosions far from the Tree of Souls. Jake also dropped explosives on the exposed part of the command ship. He started to burn and sank. Column. Quaritch dons an amp suit and jumps free from the command ship before it disintegrates in a ball of fire. He finds himself in a makeshift camp set up by Grace. At camp, Jake is in her avatar pod. Quaritch, who is ready to kill Jake, is now attacked by a Vanator that Neytiri has bonded with and travels to the site. With the help of his amp suit, the Colonel kills the Vanator and Neytiri is trapped under it. Before the Colonel has a chance to kill Neytiri, Jake arrives in his avatar. The two engage in battle, the Colonel in his amp suit and Jake as his avatar, armed only with a piece of pipe. Jake breaks the suit's plastic canopy, the Colonel opens it, puts on a breathing mask, and before moving to the structure housing the pod, asks Jake how he feels about betraying his people. "You think you're one of them? It's time to wake up," he taunted as he crashed into the mobile lab, searching for Jake's pod, intending to destroy it and human Jake. The battle resumed. Jake is grabbed by the amp suit's arm and suspended from the line of him in front of the Colonel. Meanwhile, Neytiri is about to break free. The Colonel now pulled Jake closer to him and took the knife from him, intending to finish Jake off by slitting his throat. Suddenly, Neytiri shot an arrow at the Colonel, piercing him in the middle of the chest. The Colonel, staggering, was unable to continue his attack on Jake. Neytiri's second arrow is located right next to the first arrow. She took down the amp suit Colonel. However, much damage has been done to the laboratory, which is seeping into the planet's poisonous atmosphere. Jake the human wakes up but has trouble breathing and tries to put on a mask. Neytiri arrives and helps Jake put on his mask. Hugging the human Jake, she said, "I see you." This is the first time they have met face to face. Back at Hell's Gate, most of the remaining humans are being sent to shuttles to be shipped back to Earth. However, a select few Earthlings, such as Norm and Dr. Patel, were invited to live on Pandora. Jake signs the final video record of him, where we learn that he has chosen to transfer consciousness from him to his avatar forever. In a ceremony similar to Grace's, Jake passes through Iowa's eyes and awakens in his avatar with Neytiri watching over him. Okay guys, this is the end of this beautiful movie. I hope you liked the story. There's a second part coming out in December. Leave a comment below about this movie. Don't forget to like this video. Hope you have a good day and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching this video. By clicking this you can watch the next movie. I happily invite you to watch that beautiful movie. Welcome to the cinematic universe.